Right now, though, we discuss the Wizards coaching vacancy, which hasn't really gotten a lot of attention. It's been open, really since Wes Unseld was fired in February, but we were told after the season and kind of knew the whole time that they were going to let Brian Keefe coach the season out. They didn't want any kind of distraction. They wanted to be able to look at the team and look at Keefe and look at everybody involved there and go, all right, what are we dealing with here? And then make their decisions after the season without the threat that, hey, this game could be your last, everything could be changing, whatever. Plus, you just get a more thorough feel for the candidates. Like, let's say they wind up hiring Darvin Ham. They couldn't have done that in the middle of the season. Not that I think that Darvin is the right guy for this job necessarily, but what kind of coach is, I think, is the core question. And I know we've already got a couple of calls lined up. We'll get to them in just a moment at 301-230-0980. But when I think of kind of the coach archetypes, Ant, I think of the accomplished retread, I'm going to call them. And I would put Terry Stotts, Mike Budenholzer. Like, Budenholzer's the best of that category resume-wise. NBA champion, 60 wins, multiple spots within Atlanta and in Milwaukee. Like, all the dude's done is win, and yet he's been fired in two places because he got them to a point that the incredibly good regular seasons and even some playoff success wasn't enough, and they wanted to win championships. See how that's gone for Atlanta since he left, and obviously Milwaukee was a disaster this year after they fired him. But Bud, Terry Stotts, who was under Bud in Milwaukee, under Adrian Griffin in Milwaukee, and then he left like before the season even started because he was like, I can't work for this guy. So Terry Stotts is floating out there. And there's a couple of others. Darvin Ham would be a retread at this point, and Kenny Atkinson is kind of in that category as well. Then you've got the up-and-coming assistants. And some of these are some names that you've heard of because one of them is Brian Keefe, the Wizards assistant. David Vanterpool, another Wizards assistant who's gotten some buzz about head coaching stuff in the past. Kevin Young is the highest paid assistant in the league. A guy like Sam Cassell has been floating around a lot of staffs for a long time and is highly regarded. So some of them former players, some of them coaching lifers, but that you want the up-and-coming assistant or do you want the successful coach? And I think I can make arguments for both, Ant, but let me get your thoughts real quick, and then we got a bunch of calls, so I want to get to them, and then I'll talk through my thoughts as we go here.
I think I would probably lean towards the up-and-coming assistant. And I would say that because
would you say
actually
that?
I think I might lean towards the retread, the accomplished retread, just because the retread, he's gone to situations, he's built it up, and then he's gotten it to a winning culture in that sense. So they have the experience in terms of like starting from like the ground up. I think that will be appealing to me and a Wizards fan just because we want to see, all right, year one's probably going to be stressful. Year two, we'll see some growth. Year three, we're finally contending. And in that, I guess, philosophy, I would just be more comfortable with a retread just because they've been there and they've done it before.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also depends on the retread, right? Like, I think you feel differently if it's Bud versus almost anybody else on that list because Bud's levels of success have been extremely high. Let's go to the phones, though, 301-230-0980. Let's get started with our guy, Lap. Lap, thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show. Who you got on your Wizards wish list?
Hey, what's up, Craig? I'm glad you took this topic, man. I'm probably the most diehard Wizard guy on, that calls in it, So I'm open for both, man. A retread or up-and-coming assistant coach, getting the opportunity to coach some young guys. I'm cool with that. And it's just sad when you see, things like the Knicks and Minnesota and OKC, they were struggling for a while. And, just look what they're doing in the playoffs. It's exciting that you can have a good GM, coaching staff, young team, young talent, and coaching and players that want to, play hard, for the organization and for their team, man. I'm just hoping we can get that back here one day. and maybe, draft well. And but it's definitely going to start with
Lap,
the coach. I don't
we
know
understand how winning works. Who do you want as your coach?
I was talking to Ann. It was the guy that, I guess he's assistant coach, where he was assistant coach on the Lakers. Stephen A. Smith talked about him the other day. I can't think of his name.
All right. That's enough of Lap for today. Thanks for
Phil Handy
calling. Phil Handy's the coach that used to be in LA. A lot of people like Phil Handy. He's been around a long time. I don't know why he hasn't been head coach before. But I'd like to thank Lap for explaining to us what good basketball is, that players and they play hard, and if you have a good GM, you can draft good players, and that might lead to winning. And how that's exciting as a prospect, watching other teams do it, but also sad because the Wizards haven't done it yet. Did I sum up Lap's call?
I think so.
Lap, you're banned for at least a week. That call was terrible. I call it like I see it. Thanks for listening. We got to do better than that. And what line should I go to next? I had 2, 3, and 4 up on my sheet here.
2.
All right, let's go to Paul. Paul, thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, Craig, how's it going, man? That's a tough follow, but it's cool with me.
I have faith in you, Paul.
So, for me, the coach so just get right to the point. The coach I want is Keefe.
Okay. Why is Brian Keefe your guy? Obviously there's a lot of things to like. The record was still not very good, but I don't think it's a crazy answer. Why is Keefe your guy?
The record wasn't great, but yeah, I really enjoyed the way the team played down the stretch. I mean, it was a really bold move getting rid of Unseld, and I think watching the team, down the stretch, and then during that stretch, right, you learned a lot about Keefe and other players in the league that attributed him to unlocking their abilities, and I think that is brilliant. Also, I feel like the winger, organization, the whole top brass is behind him. He's been I guess, from reading things and listening to other people talk,
Sure.
He's been a pretty brilliant assistant for a long time. And I think that takes a lot of, wherewithal to be regarded that way, and then not had a chance yet. So let's see what he got. He's hungry. The young team is hungry, hopefully, right? It's all kind of like a marriage kind of deal where everybody's hungry to success and prove themselves. I think marrying a guy like Keefe with that attitude, with the organization and the young players, I think that is a marriage made in heaven. And I just kind of want to see where that goes. And I'm just really on board with that kind of process.
Yeah,
you
Paul.
Know what I mean?
Paul, we're up against the break, so I got to let you go. But I appreciate the call. I don't disagree with you. Here's the only thing I'll say about Keefe is I don't think Keefe should have the benefit of incumbency. Now, there's going to be a general familiarity that is a boost for him. He knows a lot of these players, but a lot of these players are going to get turned over. He's worked with and understands how to work with this front office. And so there are going to be some benefits of incumbency in that way. But I think Brian Keefe should have to be the best candidate for the job. And if he's the best candidate for the job, then I have no problem with them hiring him. And there's a lot of things to like about Brian Keefe, from his player development skills to his ability to motivate and his ability to keep players focused. The competitiveness level was so much higher throughout the back half of this season, which is why Unseld got fired and why Keefe is a legitimate candidate for this job. My only questions for Keefe, and when I say questions, to be very clear, I'm not doubting that he has this. These are the questions I would ask in the interview / I'd want to understand better. And because he was the interim, they do have some level of understanding here, is how is his executive function, right? It's one thing to be the assistant and pitch ideas and work on player development, but how do you run the staff, right? How do you manage the personalities, manage the egos? And do you have that CEO, bigger picture type of ability? As long as he's got that, everything else we know he's great at. We know he's great at player development, which is huge. We know that he can implement the style of play that Winger and Dawkins want. That's huge. So there are definite benefits, and I think Brian Keefe's candidacy is really, really strong. Someone's going to have to beat him for this job. I just don't think that it is 100% locked down that it is Brian Keefe based off of the fact that they still didn't win a whole lot of games last year. And I know that their roster wasn't very good. I know that they stunk from a personnel standpoint. And there was a lot of hamstringing that was done by the front office in terms of player selection, because player selection happened on reasons that didn't always have to do with maximizing the basketball team in 2023. But I do think he is definitely on kind of that Nick Nurse, Mark Dagenau, like Mike Budenholzer at one time before being the accomplished retread was the number one lead assistant to Greg Popovich and has been an awesome head coach. So I think Keefe is in that mold, and I think he is a phenomenal candidate who's definitely going to get a really hard look and might just wind up getting this job. More of your calls on who you would like to see as the head coach of the Wizards as more candidates and more jobs, frankly, become available next. Asking you either specifically or generally, who do you want to be the Wizards' next coach? If you have a name, great, always interesting. But also, like, would you like the experienced coach who's done it before, maybe had some success, the golden version of that, perhaps being Mike Budenholzer, the former Hawks and Bucks coach who has an NBA championship to his name? Or would you prefer the up-and-coming, assistant type of coach who maybe has been top on another staff somewhere and is waiting for his shot? 301-230-0980 is the phone number, 301-230-0980. Let's go to our guy, Aries Tony. Tony, what's up, man? Thanks for holding through the break. You're on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, Craig. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good. I would say Budenholzer, start. Then my man used to, the guard from St. John's, there's a analyst.
Mark Jackson?
Did he get blackballed? Jackson? Yeah, Mark Jackson. Did he get blackballed?
Ed and I were just talking about Mark Jackson in the break, and he did a really good job in Golden State. I think the transition from Jackson to Kirk happened at the perfect time. Like, Mark had built this really tremendous defense. He had kind of empowered Steph to explore the depths of his powers. Same thing with Draymond. Like, those guys owe a lot to Mark, and we'll be the first ones to tell you that. But his offense was so rudimentary that Kerr came in, was like, this defense is great, we're keeping it, and now we're going to design an offense around all their superpowers, and the Warriors were essentially born. But the fact that he hasn't gotten a job since then, considering how well he's done and how many times he's interviewed, is kind of weird to me, and does feel like there's maybe a reason why people, like, he just might rub people the wrong way. And I don't know what it is about him that does that, but it is definitely, he's an interesting name that I doubt would be in consideration here, but you never know.
Right. Hey, Craig, can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
I heard you mention earlier about Orlando. Yeah, I would, if I was them, I would knock on the Wizards' door about Corey Kispert. But let me ask you this. If you was the Wizards, would you try to make a play on Kawhi Leonard, even though he has a bad knee?
Probably not. Which sounds crazy, but I think there's a couple reasons why I wouldn't do that. One, I think as a person, and like, Winger would know better than me. So here's the first thing I should say on this, Tony, is I would 100% follow Michael Winger's lead on this, because he was in that Clippers organization. He got Kawhi there, helped get Kawhi there, I should say, and he knows them. He knows Kawhi better than I ever possibly could, and kind of what he's like to work with. But because he's so high maintenance of a superstar in terms of his load management and things like that, I think with where they are as an organization, they're trying to build it differently. Like, if the Wizards were really trying to win right now, I'd 100% go after Kawhi. I would take that risk because he's so good. But I think that prioritizing other things right now, and then it's going to cost you a lot of money over the years, so you lose flexibility. So I just don't think they're ready for that level of superstar right now, especially one that's as complicated as Kawhi.
Well, like I say, Budenholzer would be my first choice. Then start, because I think they would need somebody experienced and came from a good, like you say, championship pedigree like that, and maybe guide the younger players, and especially the ones that's coming in off the draft and so on and so forth. So that'll be my choice. I'll go with the experienced coach more so than the up and coming.
Yeah, Tony, thanks for the call. Great insight and great questions. Let's go to Kurt. Kurt, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show. What's up?
How you doing, Craig?
I'm good, Kurt. Appreciate your call. What you got for me?
I was thinking, the Hawks and Bucks previous coach would be an excellent choice, but I was telling Anthony when I first called that I think they need a player that was a coach that was a former player. They could command respect among the players and also is respected throughout the NBA. And Mark Jackson is one of those guys that I mentioned, but the reason I think he would be good is because defense has been an Achilles heel of this team for so long. And even though his offense was antiquated, the fact that he's been in TV and he's seen so much going on, maybe he's made an adjustment. I don't know how his interview has been going, but
for sure. Like, I'm not going to hold what Mark Jackson was schematically 10 years, or at this point, 12 years ago. I think he was fired in 2013 against him. But it is weird that he hasn't gotten any other jobs.
Right. But I think they should reach out to him myself. And then the other guy, his name has been circulating for a few years, but Sam Cassell was one of those kind of guys that he the players will respect him, and he gets respect throughout the NBA. And I think that's what they need. They need a former player that commands respect. I think that's what they need.
Kurt, so here's the interesting thing about the former player, and I was thinking about this with a guy like Bud too, is in this organization, Michael Winger is in charge, and Will Dawkins is right there with him, and they are in lockstep with how they run things. And I think that having that aligned vision, to use their terminology, is really important. And an aligned vision can come from having dissenting ideas that are worked out and worked together. But I feel like with some of especially a guy like Jackson, who's a big personality, who's done it before, Cassell's a little bit different because this would be his first head coaching job. I just wonder, sometimes players think they know better, and sometimes they're right, by the way, it should be said. But sometimes they're not. And sometimes, the coaching lifer, the front office lifer, these guys have studied it in a way that is really academic and can produce tremendous results. And I just wonder the personality dynamics of a former player, or even a guy like Budenholzer, who is going to have his own thoughts and feelings on style of play and things that might not jive 100% with Winger and Dawkins. If they don't, I actually would knock any of those guys for any of those reasons off the list, because I do think not that they're not good coaches and in other circumstances couldn't work, but I think organizational alignment is really, really, really important. And I wonder with some of the bigger names and bigger personalities, if they're going to be comfortable with a GM or front office led organization.
But maybe through lessons learned, they could learn to mesh a little bit. Okay.
I mean,
maybe. Know what I'm saying? Maybe they could, it's worth a shot. At least it's worth a conversation. It's worth 100%.
100%, Kurt.
Yeah.
I appreciate the call because I don't disagree with you on that, right? I think it's worth having a conversation. Maybe Sam Cassell's really easy to work with, which would be hilarious because Sam Cassell is a player. Talking about a big personality and big other. Never mind. And do you get that joke? Do you get that reference?
Yes.
Okay. If you don't, you need to spend more time in the meme section of the internet. The point is that a guy like Budenholzer, for instance, he comes out of that San Antonio tree. And so he's certainly, that could be one of two ways. He could already have visionary alignment with the Oklahoma City guys because the Oklahoma City tree and the San Antonio tree are the same tree. Sam Presti came out of the San Antonio organization, and everything in OKC emanates from Presti. But he could also see the model that Pop had where he's in charge of everything and be like, that's what I want to be. I want to be like Pop was. So it depends on kind of where they see the power structure and the power alignment and how well they can work together, which is the thing you feel out in an interview and you establish in an interview. Hey, we're going to want these certain things. Are you comfortable with that? And if it's I got to be able to coach my team. And it's well, yeah, you got to be able to coach your team, but we're building it and we're the architects here. And so you got to make sure it's up to code, if you will. 301-230-0980. Let's get one last call in from Julio. Julio, thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show.
What's good, Hoff? How you doing, man? Appreciate you taking my call.
Yeah, you got it.
I listened to it. Listen, I like the Sam Cassell take, but I don't. It's almost like an Eric Bieniemy thing to me. Maybe it's because I'm here. My pick is JJ Redick. I heard him throw his name out in the hat I like JJ, man. I like his soliloquy when he's talking on ESPN. I think he knows X's and O's. I hate him as a player, but I feel like if this is a new regime, I'm listening.
Oh, I'm laughing at you saying you hate him as a player. That's all I was laughing at.
I'm a Georgetown fan. I'm a Georgetown to Maryland all the way. But so I hate him as a player. But,
sure.
But listen, but for what we're doing, with the pieces that we have with all the young pieces, I want to see something new. I don't want to see a retread. I don't want to see a Budenholzer. Or I don't want to see. I want to see something new. And to me, it's JJ Redick. I can see him here with that suit on, man, looking good, man. You know what I'm saying? He look good on TV. I like JJ Redick. Bring JJ Redick here, man.
Julio, thanks for the call, man. I appreciate it. JJ's so interesting to me because every fiber, like I have listened to JJ Redick's podcast through literally every iteration of it. Not like every episode, but he's a pretty regular listen for me and has been going back to when he was with Yahoo, when he was with The Ringer. Like, until he started his own media company and is doing the thing he's doing now on that podcast. And like, I knew JJ Redick was a media star before any of y'all started watching him on ESPN because I've been listening to the JJ Redick podcast in all of its various forms since the thing started. And I remember like someone recommending an episode or me finding one and being like, oh, this is interesting, and listening to him and be like, why is he this good at basketball and also better than me at my job? What the hell? He's so good. And the other thing about JJ is I think he really gets it. Like, and by the way, he's got a history with Michael Winger. I would presume that Winger would have had some overlap with him in LA. Winger was there towards the end of kind of that era. But certainly they would have crossed paths at some point in NBA circles. But the thing is, like, I think the way JJ thinks about the game is very in line with the way Will Dawkins thinks about the game, and Will, I think, does a lot of like the basketball style of play, like that kind of conversation. I think the way JJ thinks about people and teammates and chemistry and all that kind of stuff is very, very in line with the way Michael and Will want their stuff done. I think JJ is respected by former players. I think JJ would respect the hierarchy. He's got that humility, but he's never been on the bench in that kind of way. And how much do you want your coach learning on the job when you could have a guy like Bud who's won 60 games, multiple places, who knows where the landmines are and knows how to build a culture and knows how to do that stuff, having done it from that chair. It's one thing to have been a part of it, but doing it from that chair as the head coach is different. And so I don't think I actually do think there's a lot of good options here. I think some of them are going to emerge as better options than others. But I think Redick is the most interesting guy in this cycle because there's, like, in some ways, I think he's perfectly built to do something like what they're trying to do in LA. Like, hey, we just need a guy that like really knows the game, and like LeBron's a quasi coach, and we need someone to work with LeBron. Okay, well, JJ Redick can do that. He's a contemporary, whatever. But in some ways, Redick is maybe more suited for this younger generation of players where he can just be like, this is the way we're going to do it, guys. And played 15 years. You guys know that I was a really good player. You guys remember me as a player. And that's going to garner a level of respect. And so it's just an interesting place with this coaching carousel because I do think there are good options. And I do think the Wizards have obviously different paths they can go down here. I think for me, to kind of close this out, I would say the accomplished coach who's done this before, that's probably the direction I would go. If Bud or Kenny Atkinson would be up for it, Terry Stotts, any of those three, I would be down. I'd probably then go guys like Keefe, the up-and-coming assistants. Like, I want the next Nick Nurse. If I can find the next Nick Nurse at this stage of the rebuild, that's even better. Honestly, if you know who that guy is and you're Michael Winger or Will Dawkins, I want that guy even over Bud. But I'm willing to take a shot on someone behind that. And then like, hey, let's take a wild swing. Let's do the JJ Redick bit, I would say is last, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad option either. And I thought it was interesting that Mark Jackson and JJ Redick came up in the last segment or in the last, half hour of us talking about the Wizards coaching search, because I do wonder if JJ is kind of this next in line of he's the lead NBA analyst. And we saw this with Jeff Van Gundy. Van Gundy kept getting interviews, as did Mark Jackson. There's always this threat that they were going to leave. and they never quite got the job again. And now they're both gone. They got rid of Jackson first and then did the buyout with Van Gundy. I guess they both left this past summer, but Van Gundy was like part of the buyouts and everything at ESPN, and Jackson's contract expired, and they were just like, we're good, see ya. But I think it's really interesting that position seems to set you up, and in some ways it's because people are chasing the next Steve Kerr. And for JJ, he's kind of the closest to that Steve Kerr, not just because he's a white guy who can shoot, but because Van Gundy and Jackson had actually been coaches before. You know, Jackson was the Warriors coach who got fired and then was suddenly calling the games, which was really awkward those first couple of years, but also kind of cool because he had like really genuinely good insight into those teams. And then Van Gundy was the lifelong coach who eventually got run out of Houston, and that was his last coaching stop. And then he was an awesome broadcaster for a decade and a half and never should have been let go by ESPN. But now you've got JJ in that seat because, by the way, Doc Rivers left that seat to go coach again. And JJ's in that seat, and suddenly his name is coming up. And I mean, if he wants to go do it, like, more power to him. But it is kind of a weird dynamic that lead analyst spot for ESPN specifically, as you call the finals, gets, and that all of a sudden I guess in order to get that job, you got to be pretty freaking smart about basketball. And if you're pretty freaking smart about basketball, people might want you to coach it.
Yeah, I think it's that, the lead analyst position, but also the fact that he's working with LeBron James on this podcast where they talk basketball and the concepts and the ins and outs. And I think by association, I think LeBron's going to be an amazing coach if he decides to go that route. I don't know if he necessarily will, or probably go into all these, business ventures. But
he certainly doesn't have to monetarily.
Yeah. But he's a basketball savant. And I think JJ Redick, like, would we hear from him on the broadcast and also just on the podcast, I think he understands the X and O's of basketball. So I think if you are looking for that guy, what he's showing on the broadcast and then also what he's diagramming, via the podcast, I think it's a good sign.
Well, and that's the funny thing is, like, every NBA assistant coach can do that kind of stuff too, right?
Thing, yep.
And that's the thing is, like, but like not every NBA analyst can. Like, no one's watching the inside the NBA and being like, Charles Barkley, that should be our next head coach. Like, we know why Chuck's there from an entertainment value standpoint. But I do wonder, like, how much of this is owners going, I'm watching ESPN and JJ Redick's the smartest basketball guy I've ever seen, versus, like, genuinely he's up for the job. Because, to be clear, I think JJ Redick is up for the job. This is not me saying, like, JJ shouldn't be getting this love, because I think he's that smart. I think he also understands the personality dynamics. Like, there's a reason I've listened to his podcast as long as I have, because it's different. You get different analysis from him that is deeper and better and shows a more thorough understanding of the game, not just X's and O's, but the humans involved, than anybody else that I've ever heard talk about basketball in the media at that level. You have to get way more niche to try to find that depth of analysis. And so it's an interesting concoction, and I expected JJ's name to come up. I didn't really expect Mark Jackson's, but I just think it's important to point out that, like, nobody heard of Mark Daigneault 2 years ago. He wasn't doing a podcast. He was on an assistant on a bench somewhere, and now he's, one of the best coaches in the NBA and is just one coach of the year. Nobody had heard of Nick Nurse when he replaced Dwayne Casey, and, like, Nick Nurse is top 5 coach in the NBA. So there's plenty of these dudes out there. It's just the ability to go find them and know where they are if they're not on your television because they're calling the NBA Finals on ESPN.
But how important do you think the coaching job is for JJ bursting onto the scene as a first-time coach in general?
I would say this.
He wouldn't come to the Wizards. He needs to be in a...
That's the thing is, like, what kind of project... And this is like a question for, like, a Budenholzer, too. What kind of project do you want? Do you want a rebuild that's going to have some patience? Or do you want to win now and, like, if it fails, whatever, I'll just go back and do television? Like, if I'm Bud, I probably want someone with a little bit longer leash because this might be my last shot. Even if you've been as successful as him, like, do you get a 4th coaching job if you fail at your 3rd? No, I'd want the long leash. Like, I want to milk this. I want to sign a 5-year deal and feel pretty confident I'm going to get all 5 years and then hopefully get an extension somewhere because we're damn good. If I'm JJ and I fail and I go back to TV 5 years later, I can probably go get another coaching job because you just go back to TV and rehab your reputation and be like, it was a crazy ending. That organization was a mess. Like, it was the end of LeBron. Like, LeBron's my guy, but blah, blah, blah. And, it's really no harm, no foul. But like, if I'm him, I'm not going to Charlotte. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
Here, maybe. If I trust Winger and Dawkins. But I'm probably looking at something different.
Yeah.
It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Coming up next, John Kine, ESPN.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.